I'm Jeff Warner, a master gardener with the University of California Cooperative Extension in Los Angeles County. For several years now, it has been a priority of the master gardeners in the citrus growing regions of California to inform the public about a potentially devastating disease of citrus called Huanglongbing that can affect all types of citrus, lemons, limes, oranges, grapefruits, kumquats, and many others. This disease was first detected in California in 2012 in a backyard citrus tree in LA County. The California Department of Food and Agriculture established a quarantine that has now been expanded into the adjacent counties of Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino. Before HLB was detected in California, it had spread throughout the citrus growing regions of Florida with devastating results. This year, Florida's production of oranges is less than a quarter of what it was in 2004 prior to the first detection of HLB. Florida's experience gave California time to prepare, and as a result, the disease has spread much less rapidly. To date, HLB has not been found in any commercial orchard tree in California, but over 2,000 affected trees have been found on residential properties. That's why it's so important to engage the public in helping to control the spread of this disease. This presentation was funded by a California Department of Food and Agriculture grant titled Promoting Alternatives to Citrus for Backyard and Community Gardeners in the Fight Against ACP-HLB. That's the Asian Citrus Psyllid and Huanglongbing disease. The grant has three objectives: to educate the public about Huanglongbing disease and the Asian Citrus Psyllid, to promote the growing of alternative non-citrus fruit trees, and also to encourage eating more fruits and vegetables as part of a healthy lifestyle. So some of the topics I cover will be how to identify and manage the insect, how to identify the symptoms of HLB. I'll show you maps of the worldwide distribution of the insect and disease. Then I'll focus in on California, and in particular the current status of the HLB quarantine area in Southern California. I'll also talk about a biocontrol program involving the releases of a tiny parasitoid wasp that was imported from Pakistan that can help control ACP populations here. Then I'll touch on some research into such things as early detection methods and a promising treatment for HLB based on the Australian fingerlime. But first, I'm going to start with a little background on the history of citrus in California. Father Junipero Serra brought the first citrus seeds here in 1769. In 1804, San Gabriel Mission had what is considered the first significant citrus orchard. And then in 1841, William Wolskill, taking seedlings of orange and lemon from the San Gabriel Mission, planted California's first commercial citrus grove in what is today downtown Los Angeles. By 1849, the gold rush had created a huge demand for citrus to combat scurvy. And then in 1850, California became the 31st state of the Union. Now, a couple of the early varieties of citrus were the sweet orange, a sweet orange from Spain that was seedy, and a citron-type lemon. It was the introduction of the Washington navel that really changed things here. The quality of that orange was so much better than the existing oranges here. In 1873, Elizabeth and Luther Tibbetts planted the first Washington navel orange trees in Riverside, having received them from a contact they had at the Ag Department in Washington, D.C. Hence, that's why it's now called the Washington navel orange, even though it originated in Brazil. By the 1880s, California was experiencing a citrus boom, largely because of the Washington navel orange and other things, that became known as California's second gold rush. Now today, California ranks second in the nation in total citrus production, just behind Florida, and is the nation's leading producer of fresh citrus that must look good besides tasting good. Our top 5 crops are the navel oranges, mandarins, lemons, Valencia oranges, and grapefruits. Now in LA and Orange County today, there's very little commercial citrus left, but there are a lot of residential citrus trees. It's estimated there are as many citrus trees in California residences as there are in commercial orchards. Now this talk was based on the ACP-HLB portion of this talk is based on some work that Beth Grafton-Cardwell did. She was advising our program. She is now retired, but she was a entomologist working at UC Riverside and specializing in this problem. So we see on the left here is the psyllid, that's the adults and some nymphs, and on the right in orange with HLB. We'll explain what those symptoms are in just a bit. So the Asian citrus psyllid is a tiny insect about the size of a psyllid. It's a sap-feeding insect like aphids and scale are, and when it's feeding, it inserts a little stylus into a leaf or stem, And as it feeds, it always sits on the leaf in a 45-degree angle, making it very easy to distinguish from other insects. The psyllid's life cycle takes from 2 to 7 weeks, depending on temperatures, typically around 4 weeks. They go through 5 instars, starting with a tiny egg that's maybe a quarter or a third of a millimeter, and growing into an adult that's maybe 3 millimeters in size. The adults can live 1 to 2 years at that point. So there you see that feeding position that's very characteristic of ACP. And here's a cluster of adults and some nymphs together on this leaf. Now the adults can live year-round in our climate by feeding on mature citrus leaves. The hardened off leaves, their mouth parts are able to penetrate those tougher epidermal layers and feed, whereas the nymphs cannot. And so we're really not going to see too many ACP insects in our area except when our citrus is flushing, when there are new leaves growing. And on the left here you see a picture of feather flush. Those are the brand new leaves, and this is the only place where the adults are going to lay their eggs, because the nymphs cannot feed on mature leaves. They have to feed on this tender new flesh. The nymphs are also very easy to identify as compared to other insects in our area. As I mentioned, they're sap-feeding insects, and they release honeydew. They excrete honeydew, which has excess sugars that they can't process. They're just trying to, they're filtering out a lot of the protein and excreting the excess sugar. And in their case, they're different. The sugars, the honeydew is encapsulated in these waxy tubules. So if you see these little waxy tubules hanging from a leaf on your citrus tree, you can be pretty sure you have the Huanglongbing nymphs. Now the insects do some feeding damage. When they're feeding, they inject a salivary toxin, which can cause some twisting and distortion of leaves as they mature. You can even get some tip die off. But it's pretty minor, and it's probably something we wouldn't treat for, and we wouldn't be talking about it today because it's not a big problem. The big problem is that they can carry a bacteria called Candidatus liberibacter asiaticus. This bacteria can only live in either the gut of this insect or in the phloem of citrus trees or closely related trees in the Rutaceae family. And these bacteria, when they enter the tree, over time they block off the nutrient flow within the tree. And you often will see a picture like this where just a portion of the tree exhibits some of the chlorosis symptoms of HLB, but it hasn't spread throughout the whole tree at this point. It's only in this portion. Eventually it spreads to the roots, and when it does, the tree starts to decline rapidly and eventually dies. So Huanglongbing in Chinese means yellow shoot disease. Now, this is an electron micrograph of a phloem cell with the bacteria in there. And you can see this is a seed plate that's connecting two phloem cells, and the bacteria are able to actually move through these pores, and that's how they spread through the tree. So what the tree does to try to block this is they form callus. You can see on the right side picture where they're blocking the pores between the sieve elements, the pores in the seed plate, trying to keep the bacteria from moving any further. Unfortunately, it also blocks the flow of photosynthates, which then causes nutrient deficiencies in the tree. Now, HLB can take 1 to 2 years before symptoms first appear. This has been one of the problems, one of the challenges in defeating this disease, is that there can be many affected trees that aren't showing symptoms. Once they do show symptoms, you first see in the leaves this blotchy mottle, it's described as. And what you see is left and right side of a leaf, like we draw, if you look down the central vein here, the left and right side are not symmetrical. And you also don't really see a vein pattern in the leaf like you do with a lot of nutrient deficiencies. In some varieties of citrus, you'll see thickened veins, particularly if you look on the back side of the leaf, you can see these, what are described as corky veins. But not all citrus exhibits that symptom. So here's comparing Huanglongbing on the left with iron deficiency in the center and zinc deficiency on the right. You can see the nutrient deficiencies clearly have more of a symmetrical left and right appearance, and you can see the vein patterns between the chlorosis is interveinal in those cases. It clearly looks different than the blotchy model. Now, as the disease progresses, it affects the fruit. Oranges don't color up correctly, as you can see on the right. This orange, oranges typically color up starting at the bottom, so they'll be green and then they'll start becoming orange starting at the bottom, working their way up. This orange is the reverse of that. We're seeing green at the bottom of the orange. This is something called color inversion, as a symptom of HLB. As the disease progresses, the oranges become smaller, lopsided, they'll start dropping off the tree, and they become bitter at that point, just useless as a fruit. There is one disease in California that looks a little like Huanglongbing. It's called citrus stubborn. It does have some of the similar symptoms with greening and lopsided fruit and some interesting chlorosis in the leaf. It isn't quite the same as Huanglongbing. This is a bacterial infection as well. It's carried by a different insect, several types of leafhoppers. But I don't think this is as common as HLB in Southern California. I don't know if we have this in the LA area at all, but it is something that's in California in general. Now there's another picture showing you that sort of just where one region of the tree has been infected with the disease. And this is another way to distinguish a disease symptom from a nutrient deficiency. A nutrient deficiency should be pretty much uniform throughout the canopy of the tree, and a disease like Huanglongbing may only affect part of the tree, at least initially. This is probably the area where the insect fed, transferring the bacteria to the tree, and it just takes time for that bacteria to move down from that branch and then back up through the other branches of the tree and then eventually down into the root system of the tree. And eventually the tree will start looking like this. This tree is very sick at this point. You can see the greening in the fruit, the chlorosis in the leaves, and it's very likely that the ground around the tree is littered with leaves and fruit. And the canopy is very thin at this point, so this is very far along at that point. Now these pictures are both from Florida. Florida had the disease quite a while before we did, and it's been absolutely devastating to them. It's spread very quickly throughout the citrus growing regions of the state. And this picture on the left shows you an orchard where they've already cut down the trees on the perimeter of the orchard. The insect, interestingly, prefers to feed in the brighter areas, the brightly lit areas of the orchard, and so it affects the trees along the edge of the grove first, and so they've taken out those trees. On the right is a residential tree that's very, very far along. This is a very sick tree. It's going to die pretty soon. I don't have any pictures of trees that look like this in California, because in California, whenever a tree is identified as having HLB, the CDFA comes out and they have a mandate to remove and destroy that tree. But in Florida, this disease has spread throughout most of the state, and they don't expect to be able to get rid of it. So they're trying to figure out ways to live with the tree, and we'll talk a little bit about live with the disease rather. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So this disease can affect all types of citrus, as well as some other plants in the Rutaceae family, such as the orange jasmine here. Orange jasmine played a big role in spreading the disease in Florida, as I'll tell you in a minute. This one, Indian curry leaf, the insect actually loves this plant. It flushes continuously. It's used in research to raise the psyllids. But it doesn't seem to support the bacteria, so it's a good plant for research. It's been suggested that plant be used as a trap plant, but I think there's downsides to that as well, and so it's not being widely used as a trap plant currently. But there is some research going on where they can introduce a type of BT, a Bacillus thuringiensis, that's specific to the psyllids, into Indian curry leaf plants, and then as a trap plant, the insects would fly to that plant, feed on it, and then be killed by the BT that's in the plant. But that's not available yet. So we've seen that the insects can spread the disease, but so can we by grafting infected budwood, and that's how the disease got here in California, as I'll show you in just a bit. Now, to positively identify this disease, samples of leaves have to be taken from a tree and sent to a lab to do a PCR test. That's the same type of test, a polymerase chain reaction test, that's used to identify coronavirus. Very often, however, this test comes out negative even when the tree does have the bacteria. These false negatives are often maybe because of sampling area. They didn't take leaves from the right part of the tree. But it's a problem with this disease that there are often trees out there that are probably sick that have not been identified yet. So this is showing you the worldwide distribution of the HLB. There are three varieties or three species of the bacteria. In the United States, we only have one of these, the Asian form. But there's an African form that's in Africa, that's the darker orange area there. And then there's an American form that's not shown on this map, that's just in South America, mostly in Brazil. The disease first was identified in China in 1919, and then slowly spread to adjacent countries. It's taken quite a few years, nearly a century, to reach the United States. So these are the three forms. The Asian form is considered the most problematic. It causes the most damage to citrus groves, which is one we have, unfortunately. It's a heat-tolerant form, which means it continue to spread through the tree at temperatures up to about 95 degrees, and it's spread just by the Asian Citrus Psyllid that we have here. The African form is cold sensitive, so it wouldn't be as effective here if we had it. It's also carried by a different insect, the African Citrus Psyllid. And then the American form is also a heat sensitive form, but again, it's not here in the United States. So the insect first appeared in Florida in 1998. And it moved pretty quickly throughout the state, at least all the citrus growing regions of the state, and in part because of orange jasmine. This is an ornamental type of citrus that's really popular in Florida, and the nursery industry were moving these plants up and down without realizing that they had the insect, and moving the insect all over the state. And the reason it's so effective at moving the insect around and spreading it is because this type of citrus flushes multiple times a year, and so it's a favorite host plant and food source for the psyllids. Fortunately, this is not a common plant in Southern California. So HLB followed a few years later. In 2005, it was first detected in the Miami-Dade area. You see the yellow star there on the map. But it didn't take long, about 3 years before the entire citrus growing regions of the state had HLB. And by 2019, it was estimated that orange production in Florida had dropped by 75% and grapefruit production by 85%. So it's been really devastating economically to Florida, as well as to residential citrus, where most trees have been destroyed at this point. Now there's a federal ACP quarantine that's affecting almost every state along our southern border except for New Mexico currently. The insect may not be distributed throughout the entire state as it's showing here, but this is the current quarantine areas. And it does pretty accurately show you where the insect is in California. Although Southern California, the insect here is what they consider resident and established. Where above, say, the Grapevine area up into the Central Valley, they do find the insect, but it has not established there. They're able to treat it with insecticides to knock it out. And that's one of the reasons why the Huanglongbing quarantine is only in Southern California currently. We only have the disease here. It has not affected the really important citrus growing regions of the Central Valley. Fortunately, Huanglongbing is not as widespread as the psyllid is. This map shows you that 6 states and 2 U.S. territories are currently in quarantine for HLB. Georgia, even though the whole state is in quarantine, my understanding is that the disease is really only along the border with Florida and along the coast. The disease first appeared in Florida in 2005, then in 2008 they found it in Louisiana. By 2009 it was in Georgia, South Carolina, and Puerto Rico. 2012 is when California and then Texas had the disease. A couple years later, 2014, they found it in Guam, and then most recently in 2017, Alabama became part of the quarantine area. So back to the insect. In California, this orange area, Southern California, is showing you the area where ACP is well established. And then the green areas are where ACP has been found, but where it's been effectively eradicated. There's additional counties. This map is from 2019. There are some other counties now that have been added, that need to be added to the map where they found ACP. But fortunately, it is not established in the Central Valley. Now this animation shows you the ACP as it moved up into California from Mexico in 2008. And you can see how it jumped from the border in San Diego area up to LA, and then it jumped again up to the Central Valley. Clearly, that was people moving citrus, moving the psyllids, probably inadvertently, that allowed it to move so quickly through our state. This CDFA map shows you the current boundaries of the HLB quarantine in Southern California that affects Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. The red star is a location, it's in Hacienda Heights, where the first infected tree was found by the CDFA. I have a video I'll show you later of that tree being removed. The quarantine area currently covers over 1,500 square miles, and as of the end of April, 2,223 infected trees had been identified and removed. Now, as new trees are found, the quarantine area is expanded. This year so far, there's been 4 expansions. The first one was on January 8th in Riverside County in the Moreno Valley area. And then on March 9th, another expansion in Riverside County in the Corona area. More recently, there's been 2 expansions in Long Beach, both smaller. One was 4 square miles on March 29th, and then another expansion of 5 square miles on April 20th. There's a link to the map there, as well as a place to sign up for updates from the CDFA. Anytime a new infected tree is found and they're proposing an expansion of the quarantine area, you can get that notification showing you all the latest maps. There's another map that was created by the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources, UCA&R, that we like to promote, and we've made a handout to give out at our in-person events. At the bottom right-hand corner is a QR code that you can scan to go to that map. This handout's available in Spanish, English, and Chinese. And like the map itself, it gives you different recommendations based on how far you are for an infected tree. So to use this map, you put your address in or click somewhere on the map, and it puts up a double ring bullseye. And if you're within 2 miles of infected trees, all these squares are infected trees, you'll get a red ring in the center indicating that you're very close to infected trees. And then they give you a warning encouraging you to remove your trees because they may likely be infected being this close to other infected trees. Now, we know this is a hard sell. People are not likely to take their trees out until they're clearly showing symptoms of the disease. I picked this location at the Huntington Library and Botanical Gardens because master gardeners volunteer here. They've got a nice variety of citrus back in an area called the Ranch, as well as a Valencia orange grove along one parking lot. And there's a link for that map there. Now, if you're a little further away, this location at the Arlington Garden in Pasadena, again chosen because they have a citrus orchard on the right side there of the diagram of their grounds. This location is within 5 miles, but outside of the 2-mile radius. So, because they're within 5 miles, they are still within the HLB quarantine area. And of course, this map here, as well as our recommendations, are that you are treating for the psyllids if you are this close to infected trees. And then I chose another location that was well outside the quarantine. This is Ishihara Park in Santa Monica. Master gardeners help maintain a small citrus grove there as well. They fortunately are quite a ways from the quarantine currently, and in the last couple of years there hasn't been much movement westward of the quarantine boundary. Now, the infected trees are not really evenly distributed throughout the quarantine areas. There's some really heavy concentrations of infected trees, particularly in Orange County. There's been, I mentioned this, total of 2,323 trees that have been removed. Well more than half of those have been found in Orange County and concentrated in certain areas like in Santa Monica and Garden Grove and Anaheim. The red text indicates that they've updated those numbers recently in those areas. So there's quite a bit of variation in how concentrated this problem is. This is that first infected tree that was found in Hacienda Heights in 2012. The homeowner had gone to China and brought back with them some cuttings. I believe it was lemon cuttings that were grafted then into an existing pomelo tree in the backyard. And unfortunately, those cuttings had the bacteria in them, and which then subsequently infected this tree. Fortunately, the CDFA found this tree and were able to remove it. So I'm going to show you a short video of the CDFA doing just that.
And then if it needs to be shortened, we'll cut from the top.
This Southern California citrus tree has unfortunately reached the end of its life. It was found to have Huanglongbing, also known as citrus greening, a fatal disease of citrus for which there is no cure. It is spread by a pest called the Asian Citrus Psyllid.
The symptoms of Huanglongbing are irregularly shaped fruit, off-color fruit, bitter taste, reduction in yield, and finally the Huanglongbing will kill the citrus tree. Older trees take longer to die, younger trees die relatively quickly.
Until 2012, Huanglongbing had not been detected in California. However, this tree at a residence in Los Angeles County was found to have the disease, the first confirmed case of Huanglongbing in California. A CDFA crew, working carefully with the resident, removed the tree limb by limb. The roots were dug up and removed for analysis and disposal. Due to the highly infectious nature of the disease, all of the leaves, branches, and roots were double-bagged and removed from the premises. This will be the protocol for future detections of diseased trees.
It's very important to remove the reservoir of the disease, to take it away so the disease doesn't spread. The disease can spread very easily with the Asian Citrus Psyllid if the disease is present. But if we remove the disease and we suppress the population of the insect, we can slow the spread of this disease, protect California citrus. This, however, is a short to mid-term solution. For a long-term solution, we need to look to our researchers to find either trees that are resistant to the disease or some more effective control method.
Upon discovery of the diseased tree, a quarantine was established in the area surrounding the detection site. Citrus trees within about a half-mile radius are being treated to reduce the psyllid population and limit the chance the disease can spread. Also, residents are asked not to move citrus fruit or citrus plants from their property. These steps will also be an important part of the protocol for future detections. If you suspect your tree has the citrus pests or the Huanglongbing disease, please call your county agricultural commissioner or the CDFA hotline at 1-800-491-1899.
California has a biocontrol program to help control the population of ACP here. These tiny parasitoid wasps, Tamarixia radiata, are being released throughout the areas where ACP is. These wasps were originally brought back by a UC Riverside researcher, Mark Hodel, who had gone to Pakistan to look for natural enemies of this insect, which we didn't have here, and so we weren't able to control this, the spread of this insect very effectively. He chose an area of Pakistan that was, a fairly good climate match for Southern California, and he brought back a couple candidates. They were originally releasing 2 species of wasp, but currently they're just releasing these Tamarixia radiata because these have been the most effective so far. And like with other parasitoids, they lay their eggs either on or in a nymph in this case, and then the larvae of the wasp develop and into an adult and destroy the nymph in the process, consume it, and then eventually they exit the top of the nymph here, and you can see the exit hole that the adult wasp has made, leaving behind a mummy. So if you do see these type of mummies, you know you have the wasp in your area helping to control ACP. So this shows you the life cycle of the wasps. They lay their eggs underneath a nymph, a 4 or 5 instar nymph. The tiny egg then hatches into a larva, and then the larva slowly consumes the ACP nymph before emerging as an adult. So this is another map that you can use to see the HLB quarantine. This one's put out by UC A&R. And instead of showing you the locations of affected trees, I'm showing you where these Tamarixia wasps are being released or have been released in Southern California. You can see how concentrated the releases are in the HLB quarantine area, but they're releasing them all over the place wherever they're concerned about ACP populations. Tamarixia radiata is currently the only one being released, but as I mentioned, there was another wasp that I've crossed out there that was being released for a while. That wasp didn't get established here, and so they stopped that part of the program. So these wasps have to be raised in captivity. It's a bit of a process. They grow curry leaf in cages where they could raise the ACP. Again, because curry leaf flushes continuously, it's an easy plant to raise ACP on. And then once the ACP are there, they release, and there are fourth and fifth instar nymphs on the curry leaf plants. They have to introduce the wasp into the cages, and then once those reproduce, they're able to collect those wasps into jars and then start releasing them. So it's an expensive process. My understanding is it costs about 50 cents per wasp to raise them this way. There's an interesting video there that you can that shows you that whole process of raising these wasps. And here's a link to the map down here. So up in the important Central Valley area, where our commercial citrus is concentrated, they're also releasing those wasps up there. So I show you some segments of the map. It's hard to see if you try to take it all in at once. But up in here, Visalia, up in the Central Valley, very important citrus growing region. And so they do continue to try to combat it up there, even though they don't have HLB currently. Ant control is really critical for controlling ACP populations. Ants harvest honeydew from insects like aphids and scale and ACP that produce honeydew, and then they protect the insects against their enemies, like the Tamarixia wasp you see here in this picture, which is trying to lay an egg underneath these nymphs when it got attacked by this Argentine ant. There's a video here you can watch two Tamarixia wasps being attacked by these ants. So Riverside is still an important citrus growing region in Southern California, in particular because of the location of the UC Riverside Citrus Variety Collection, where more than 1,000 varieties of citrus are maintained. It's also the home of the last surviving Washington navel orange tree, one of the original Washington navel orange trees, as well as California's Citrus State Historic Park. And you can see the Citrus Variety Collection is within the 2-mile radius. They're very close to infected trees. And the Washington navel orange is within the 5-mile radius. The Citrus State Park is still a little bit outside the zone, but not very much. So we're going to return to the Washington navel orange tree for just a minute. We already learned that the Tibbetts family planted the first 2 trees. They made a good living selling budwood. Local growers were willing to pay $5 per bud back in 1875. Compare that to today, where you can buy budwood from the Citrus Clonal Protection Program for $1.50 per bud. In 1893, because of citrus, Riverside became the wealthiest city in the United States. When the original 2 Washington navel orange trees were about 30 years old, the city of Riverside, realizing the importance of those trees, decided to move them to new locations. They moved one of them to here at the Mission Inn, the historic Mission Inn in Riverside, and you see Teddy Roosevelt was on hand for the planting of that tree. But that tree developed Phytophthora. Phytophthora is a fungal-like infection that's still a problem today with citrus. And that tree, you can see they cut down the tree and saved the stump, and this, what you see down here is a lesion left by the Phytophthora. The other tree was moved to a location in Riverside that you can visit currently. It's on the corners of Magnolia and Arlington Streets in Riverside. Back in 1910, when this picture was taken, the tree was still healthy, but shortly after, it developed Phytophthora just like its sibling did. But they were able to save this tree. They planted a number of varieties of citrus around the tree, varieties that were more resistant to Phytophthora, and they grafted those saplings into the trunk of the mother citrus tree, and were able to save it. You can see what those look like some 25 years later as they've grown out. Even those started developing Phytophthora, and they had to repeat this process again with other varieties of citrus. And this is a technique called in-arch grafting. So here's the Washington navel orange tree as it looked just a little over a year ago, February of 2020, when I was down there visiting the Citrus Park. The tree is still fairly healthy. It's producing oranges. They look kind of small to me for a Washington navel orange. But the fact that nearly 150-year-old tree is still producing oranges is really remarkable. Today, of course, it's in a greenhouse, a fine mesh enclosure protecting it from the psyllids. So let's circle back and see what we can do as growers of citrus at home. The first thing to do, of course, is inspecting your citrus whenever it's in flush, which would be, say, in February, late winter. Some varieties of citrus, though, will flush several times a year, and if you live near the coast, it's more likely your citrus trees are flushing more than once a year. And of course, inspect them for the adults, the eggs, and the nymphs. Now, if you do find Asian citrus psyllids in your tree, you can treat with soft insecticides like horticultural oils and insecticidal soaps that are not toxic to us and less toxic to beneficial insects. However, these are not as effective as some of the stronger insecticides, and they need to be reapplied fairly often, maybe every 5 to 10 days. And then they have to be applied to the entire canopy of the tree because they're contact insecticides. They don't leave residues that are effective later on for controlling the insect. Now, of course, ant control again is really important. One thing that you can try is using a sticky barrier to keep the ants from climbing the tree. This is tanglefoot that's been spread on a paper collar, and the ants get stuck in that. But eventually, they form bridges, and so that material has to be respread in order to be effective over the long term. And then you can try to reduce ant populations in your yard. We recommend lower toxicity baits like those based on boric acid. The one brand would be Taro. They make a boric acid bait that I've used. Their baits are 5% solution, whereas UC recommends a 1 or 2% solution. The idea being that the lower strength toxin kills the ants more slowly, giving them time to take the bait back to the nest. I've been able to reuse the baits I bought. Once they're empty, I just clean them out and fill them with a solution I've made myself using a solution of borax. Borax is a laundry additive you can get at the grocery store. And then you can also try creating barriers to the insects. One such barrier can be made with kale and clay. This is a porcelain type clay, a very fine material that's suspended in water and then sprayed over the entire tree. And it's used to control other insects on fruit trees. The other thing to try is a physical barrier with a mesh covering. Tree defenders were developed in Florida for this purpose. They make a bigger one that's, I think it's up to 15 foot size. However, I think it's going to be difficult to use these on larger trees. It's probably more effective on the smaller trees, and most of the pictures I've seen where these are used, they've been fairly small trees. Now, when you're pruning, you want to make sure you don't put the cuttings into your greens bin, and then those cuttings then get moved off-site, potentially moving the insect and possibly the disease as well. So what we're recommending is that you leave the cuttings on the ground for a couple weeks to dry out. The insects have no interest in the cuttings once the leaves are dry. And then you can put them in with your green waste at that point. Or if you don't want to leave them on the ground, bag them up and put them in with your regular trash. Or you could also, I suppose, compost it or chip it on site and use it as a mulch. Of course, always purchase new trees from a reputable nursery. Inside the ACP quarantine, which again is all of Southern California and parts of Central California, citrus trees are marked with these tags, either yellow or blue tag, that tells you that you're in the area where ACP is found and that you cannot move that tree outside that area. So it's fine to take it home, you just don't want to move the tree again after that. And then budwood, you can't, people do their own grafting. Nowadays, you don't want to take cuttings from a friend's house and then graft it into your tree. Instead, you only want to get budwood from a source that is guaranteed to be free of the disease. And the only source in Southern California for most home growers is going to be the California Citrus Clonal Protection Program. This website here, Fruit Mentor, by Dan Willey, covers all the different aspects of propagating citrus, grafting, and rooting citrus cuttings. And he tells you a lot about the CCPP as well. It's been a really great resource. Now, on the left is the cover of a brochure that the Citrus Clonal Protection Program has on their website. It really explains the whole program, how all the citrus that comes into California has to go through this program, where they can repropagate the trees, doing things like micrografts and other types of propagation techniques, and guarantee that what they have at the end is a pathogen-free tree that they then can take budwood from and sell to growers and to homeowners alike. So you can create an account on their website for free and purchase cuttings for $1.50 per bud, which is twice what it was last year, unfortunately. And you do have to buy 6 buds at a time in what's called a bud stick. So each bud stick costs about $9, but they have a lot of varieties, far more varieties than you're ever going to find in a nursery. So a lot of things, if you want to grow them, this is really the only way to get those cuttings right now. This is showing you up in Exeter, California at the Lynn Cove Research and Extension Center, where a lot of the budwood is grown and then comes down to us. Of course, now they have these greenhouses where they've replanted a lot of citrus so they can maintain those varieties in a disease-free environment. And larger trees are planted in the ground, so they're planted in the ground because those are more popular varieties, whereas the less popular varieties are grown in containers. The official position of the CDFA is that we should not be moving homegrown citrus off of our properties. Of course, that's a really tough sell. People want to put it into the kids' lunch and share it with their friends. So what most experts are recommending more practically is that you remove all the green stems and leaves from the fruit, rinse it off to make sure there's no psyllids on it, and then it should be safe to share. The fruit itself can contain the bacteria, which is harmless to us, but the psyllids don't feed on the fruit, and so they're not going to pick it up that way. You're not moving the disease around by sharing fruit. But it's really important to make sure there are no leaves or any green material still attached to the fruit when you do move it off your property. Now, if you think your tree has symptoms of HLB, you should contact the CDFA pest hotline. They have a phone number and an email site that you can contact them. Back a couple months ago, I sent them pictures of a cocktail grapefruit tree that I have growing in a whiskey barrel. And the tree was really not looking good. The leaves had symptoms that were blotchy. They didn't look like any type of nutrient deficiency that I recognized or could find pictures of. And so I just wanted to make sure, even though it didn't really look a lot like Huanglongbing either, within 24 hours they got back to me and they confirmed that it was not Huanglongbing, which of course was comforting to me. I still don't know what's wrong with that tree though, so I have to figure out how to improve its health. If you're up in Central California and you find the insects, you should also contact the pest hotline. In Southern California, the insect is well established here, and so I don't think they're going to do anything if you contact them just about the pest. So now I'm going to turn to some of the research that's Now I'm going to turn to some of the research efforts that are being made. One of those is to improve early detection techniques. As I mentioned, the symptoms of the disease may not appear for a year or two after the infection. And that's because HLB, it does have a short latent period, which is the time between when the tree gets infected and when it itself becomes infectious. But it has a long incubation period, that 1 or 2 years from the time it's infected before the symptoms appear. And so they've been looking for techniques to identify sick trees much earlier in the process. And what they found is that an infected tree will release volatile organic compounds that are very specific to that disease, and so they can uniquely identify it and differentiate it from other types of disease. So they call this an odor print, and so they can take, for instance, a gas chromatograph, a field version of a gas chromatograph, sample the air around a tree that's infected, and identify this odor print. They've also been able to train dogs to recognize these odors as well. So Florida has a program to do this, and they've loaned some dogs to California. But I've learned that they've done tests here in California with these dogs, and the dogs have identified some trees, but whenever we've taken samples of those trees, sent them in for the PCR test, they come out negative. So far they don't really know. It's just been a sampling error, like it's so common with these PCR tests, or is something else. So right now it's not a real effective part of our efforts to control HLB. Now in Florida, because the disease is so widespread, they're now relying on growing varieties of citrus that can actually still produce well even when they're infected, like this sugar bell mandarin here in the picture. You can see the chlorosis in the leaves, but the fruit still looks good and it's still producing really well. And it's because there are some varieties that we already have that are they're not immune to the disease, but they're resistant. They can survive with the disease for quite a long time and remain productive. So some of these are like the Tango and Gold Nugget Mandarin that were developed here at UC Riverside, as well as the Sugar Bell. Most varieties of lemons are fairly resistant naturally to HLB. as is the Persian lime, but not so much the Mexican lime. And then there's an orange variety that's not really a commercial variety so far called Sun Dragon. It's fairly ugly looking orange. You can see why it doesn't have commercial popularity, but they're starting to do trials with that as well because it's resistant. And then the Jackson grapefruit. And then the Australian finger lime is very, very resistant to the disease, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. And there's, of course, now breeding programs trying to develop new varieties that are resistant as well, using conventional breeding techniques as well as genetic engineering. So here's the Australian finger lime. This is getting to be a much more popular citrus anyway because the fruit is so interesting. The vesicles are not attached to each other, so you can squeeze it, and they come out like citrus caviar. They're really popular now for cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. Where a couple places I volunteer at the Huntington and the Fairplex, we have these trees, and they're super popular with anybody we give samples to. But fortunately, this tree doesn't really get sick. They found that the trees, when they're infected, really don't show any symptoms. So last year, Dr. Haling Jin at UC Riverside decided to find out why that was, and she discovered an antimicrobial peptide in the finger limes that they think is responsible for its resistance to Huanglongbing. And so they're now developing that. She published a paper recently on the subject, and they're working with a company to develop an injection technology. But the peptide could also be sprayed on the leaves of the tree and is effective. So when a tree is sick and has been treated with this peptide, the symptoms clear up fairly quickly. But it's not a cure; it's a treatment. It's going to help. It's going to help keep these trees alive longer. But it does have to be reapplied maybe 2 or 3 times a year to be effective. But they also are hopeful that when it's applied to a tree that hasn't been affected yet, that it'll be protective and keep the tree from getting sick in the first place. So the second goal of our grant, as I mentioned, was to promote growing non-citrus fruit trees. Of course, non-citrus fruit trees can't become infected with Huanglongbing. And so by growing those instead of maybe growing a new citrus tree, you're helping to slow the spread of the disease. So we developed this brochure you see here, which has a number of different pictures of fruit that we think grow really well in the Mediterranean climate of Southern California, like jujubes and loquats, apples. I've got persimmons, pomegranates, figs. On there as well as some other ones listed on the back. And these are all varieties that do really well in our climate. Now, if you're really interested in fruit trees, I highly recommend getting involved with the California Rare Fruit Growers. They have 4 chapters in LA County, another chapter in Orange County, and others throughout California, as well as Arizona and Texas. And they have lots of great information on their website, but they also have monthly meetings with guest speakers, and so you can really learn all about different types of fruit trees from this group. And it's not just rare fruit, as the title would suggest. It's really any kind of fruit. Oranges and apples are very popular among our members as well. And then the final goal of our project is to promote eating more healthy foods. So to do that, we have various handouts like this Harvest of the Month that was produced by the California Department of Public Health, where they have a number of different fruits that they feature each month, giving you nutritional information as well as preparation tips. The USDA, of course, has a lot of great guidance on eating healthy. The My Plate program, which replaced the Food Pyramid program, tries to simplify things by showing you that a plate that has fruits and vegetables covering half of it is about the right proportion. The USDA publishes dietary guidelines for Americans. A new version just came out recently, where they tell us that fruits and vegetables provide many of the nutrients that Americans tend to underconsume, things like magnesium, potassium, vitamins A, C, and K, as well as dietary fiber, and that some fruits and vegetables contain compounds that are protective against certain chronic illnesses, things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain cancers. And that, of course, fruits and vegetables, when prepared without added fats and sugars, are low in calories. And many of these recipes are available in other languages such as Spanish and Chinese. So for our project, we created a website where you can download these materials. You can watch other videos that we created for this project from here. This is called Alternatives to Citrus, just like our grant. If you want to learn more about the Asian Citrus Psyllid in Huanglongbing, I recommend UC's Integrated Pest Management site, where they've created a 6-page pest note as well as a 1-page quick tip on this subject. It's a great site for all sorts of information on pests and diseases. And then the Citrus Pest and Disease Prevention Program. This is an initiative funded by California citrus growers and administered by the CDFA, dedicated to combating serious pests and diseases that threaten California's citrus industry. And so they have free materials as well. They have 2 websites. One is californiacitrusthreat.org and the other is citrusinsider.org. There's some overlap, but there's different information on both these sites. And they have handouts that they will send you if you're going to have some kind of a community event and you want things to hand out on this subject. There's also UC A&R's has a good site on ACP HLB that has separate sections for growers, homeowners, and master gardeners. And then to look at all the different types of invasive insects in California, I'd recommend UC Riverside Center for Invasive Species Research website. They, of course, cover ACP and HLB there as well. And then for more information on research that's going on, check out the Science for Citrus Health website. Our website has links to some of the other videos and workshops we created for this series. The one called Beyond Citrus Fruit Tree Options for Los Angeles and Southern California is an introduction to fruit trees, how to select varieties that'll do well in California, and how to take care of them. Another one called Fruit Trees for a Fall Harvest, where I go into detail on pomegranates, figs, jujubes, and persimmons, all of which do well in our climate. And then I did a citrus care workshop because so many people still want to, plant new citrus, and so I go over a lot of different varieties that are available and how to take care of your citrus trees in general. All these talks do cover ACP Huanglongbing at the end. And then Monique Rivera is a UC Riverside entomologist who trains master gardeners on this subject. And she did a talk for the California Rare Fruit Growers, their Foothill chapter, back last year. And she has a unique way of covering the subject where she compares HLB to COVID-19, showing you some of the parallels between those 2 diseases. So here are some links to the Master Gardener program, our website, some of our social media sites. Our Grow LA Victory Garden Initiative is a 4-week beginning gardening series that we do at about a dozen sites twice a year in the spring and fall. And if you want to keep up with the Master Gardener program, you can click on this link to sign up for our newsletter and get email announcements whenever we are doing something interesting in the area. And I should have mentioned that the slides for this presentation, where you can just click on these links, is going to be available in the description area where the YouTube video is posted. Well, thank you for taking an interest in this important topic. We hope to get back to our in-community activities very soon, as you see here at the LA County Fair back in 2019, where the Master Gardeners have a booth each year that's open all 19 days of the fair. We see Master Gardener Sarah here giving a talk on Huanglongbing, and at our table we give out seeds, have gardening literature of various types, and of course just want to talk to you about gardening. So we'll be back in 2022, which will be the 100th anniversary of the LA County Fair, so we expect that to be a very exciting event. Okay, thank you.